Welcome everyone back to Weekly Weather Updates, and for today's first video we're going to do our third 2021-2022 winter look ahead. Now we're going to go through what we're going to be seeing from the Met Office. They've put out an official blog statement on what we could be seeing for the start of winter. We'll then have a look at the stratosphere, have a look at the NAO, AO, and then we'll finish up having some fun, having a look at some ECMWF, longer range forecast, the GFS longer range ensemble charts, and then we'll also have a look at the CFS at the end of the video as well. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you do like and subscribe, and do remember to follow on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. So for the last few updates, we've been talking about the potential for seeing some early season colder weather, and that's something that we've been seeing for the last few weeks, really, simply because we have the easterly QBO. We have what is happening in the ENSO region at the moment, where we do have La Nina conditions taking over, and we also have a weaker than average stratospheric polar vortex at the moment. Now, what we're looking at right now is an official blog post from the Met Office news team. Now, it is not a forecast, but it is just sort of a statement they've made. Potentially colder than average conditions for the start of winter. In the coming weeks, you can expect to hear more in the media about the impacts of UK's late autumn and winter weather emanating from La Nina, part of the pattern of climate variability in the tropical Pacific. Now, seasoned climate watchers will be aware of the ENSO, which we've been talking about for the last few weeks, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, a pattern of oceanic and atmospheric variability, which, depending on the exact phase, can lead to a mild warming or cooling of the planet. Much of the time, ENSO is in a so-called neutral state, but sometimes variation becomes more extreme when we get warmer El Nino or cooler La Nina phase. During La Nina, stronger than normal trade winds blow warm water towards the West Pacific, causing upwelling of cool water from the ocean depths in the East Pacific. This cools the tropical East Pacific and leads to variation in global weather. La Nina conditions are now present in the tropical Pacific, and forecasters are suggesting these conditions will continue through the next few months. And you can see the Ensemble mean anomaly for November, December, January, which was issued this month, is for a La Nina, and you can see the colder than average sea surface temperatures over towards the East Pacific, and you can see this potentially is going to bring some knock-on effects to the UK. Now, La Nina doesn't just affect the tropical Pacific, as it can even see an influence in the Atlantic jet stream and the weather in the UK. In early winter, it is associated with Atlantic ridging and northwesterly winds, which is consistent with the current Met Office long-range outlook. In late winter, it is associated with westerly, milder and wet conditions when compared to normal. So that's why the emphasis really has been on the shorter range in the start of winter for the potential for seeing colder than average conditions. You can see northwesterly winds, which are not always guaranteed to bring very cold conditions, but it is a colder direction than what we'd normally see with west or southwesterly winds. Professor Adam Scafie, sorry if I've butchered that name, but head of long-range forecasting at the Met Office, said La Nina has a profound effect on weather across the globe and can have impacts extending as far as the UK. In late autumn and early winter, La Nina tends to lead to high pressure developing in the mid-Atlantic, which stops Atlantic weather systems from delivering mild air to the UK. And that is something what we're actually seeing at the moment with the Atlantic ridging and the colder polar maritime air mass we have over us at the moment. Now, it is only the 22nd of October, so we haven't got that much cold air to our north, so it's not been too extreme yet. But if we did see this pattern continue, then we'd be very interested towards the middle to end of November and start of December. So it can allow colder conditions to intensify. However, in late winter, La Nina tends to drive a strengthening of the jet stream towards the Arctic, increasing storminess and heavy rainfall while bringing mild conditions to our sector. Now remember, late winter is still 3-4 months away, sort of February, March time, which was categorised as late winter. So things can still change towards then. So even though the prediction at the moment would be a higher than average chance of a colder start to winter and a higher than average chance of milder end of winter, End of winter is 3-4 months away, so things can change. And remember, this is not the only climate driver. This is just one of a few climate drivers that we do look at. So it's not guaranteed, because remember, we could see some stratospheric warming in January or February, and that could put all of this out, and we could be seeing colder conditions. So, it all does depend on what really happens with other drivers as well. So, however, these conditions are not guaranteed. Last winter there was also a La Nina, but the impacts of the northeast Atlantic strayed from usual. So, yeah, last winter didn't quite follow in correlation with what we'd normally see. But then we did have a sudden stratospheric warming in January, which led to that very cold end of January and start of February. It is important to remember that the ENSO cycle is an important driver of global and UK weather, but other drivers, as I've said, such as the quasi-biennial oscillation, the QBO, can lead to different conditions. The QBO is a regular variation of winds that blow either east or west high above the equator. Aidan McGivern is a Met Office weather presenter. He explained this winter the QBO is in an easterly phase. That's what we looked at in our first winter update, and there's an increased chance of a weakened jet stream across the Atlantic, making colder weather effects on the UK more likely. The current 6 to 30 day outlook from the Met Office highlights the uncertainty around the impacts from global climate drivers on the UK weather. Despite the La Nina and QBO effects, there is an emphasis on temperatures being generally near above average for the rest of October, but there is a suggestion of a more settled and colder spell, with the threat of associated wintry hazards such as frost and fog become established later in the season. Now, this is an interesting update from the Met Office blog team. I'm pretty surprised they've actually said this, potentially colder than average conditions from the start of winter, because the Met Office tend to not be particularly bullish with longer range forecasts beyond probably a week to 10 days. And that's simply because you get a lot of clickbait within news articles. If the Met Office, for example, in their 6 to 30 day update said increased chance of colder conditions, you'd get one of the tabloids coming out saying Arctic blast incoming for end of November. So I am surprised that the Met Office have actually created this article. And the 6 to 30 outlook does, of course, say generally near or above average, simply because the Met Office rarely ever do, in the longer range forecast, anything colder than average, simply because in general we have had a warming climate, so it has tend to be warmer than average. And of course, if they did say colder than average, we would be getting those clickbait titles. And really, for everyone out there who wants to read these articles, the weather is only really relevant maybe 7 to 10 days out. So yeah, the Met Office do tend not to be this bullish, but very interesting that the Met Office put out a blog post, and this is what we've really been saying over the last 2 videos in terms of an increased chance of early season colder conditions. So we now have a look at the stratosphere, which is another climate driver, and we did have a look at this in more detail last week. Now it has changed in the last week. We have gone down to almost record low strength of the zonal winds at 10 HPA above the North Pole. But you can see the green here, if we take off the CFS, that is the GFS ensembles. In a moment, you can see it is forecasted to be well below average, where that black line is sort of the average mean winds. But you can see as we head towards the start of November, maybe the first week, you can see most go to around or above average. Very interesting to see from that. Now remember, these are the same GFS ensembles that we have a look at on our sort of 7 to 10 day forecast. So they are very varied in the longer range forecast. So they could very much change over the next few days. So you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but the general trend is that it's going to be strengthening, which we would expect, really. We wouldn't expect it to be below average for the whole season for 3 months, which is really quite unlikely. So it is going to strengthen at some point, and we just have to really see what the knock-on effects from this at the moment. You can see with the amount of amplification we have in the jet stream, and I'll show you some anomaly charts in a minute. With the amount of application, you can see that this already is having a bit of a knock-on effect on our tropospheric weather. If we do take off the GFS and we have a look at the uncorrected CFS, as the CFSs tend to be biased towards a weaker than average polar vortex, you can see most of the CFS ensemble members are well below average in terms of the 10 HPA winds. You can see it does have a sort of recovery over the next few weeks, but only gets just below average before trends generally a sort of decrease between the ensemble members, as some go much below average, some go much higher, and some are even forecasting quite a strong sudden stratospheric warming towards the end of December and start of January. Now, if we have a look at the bias corrected, so this is where they've corrected the bias, you can see it's a much more even spread. Still, the majority are below average, at least until the start to middle of December, where some then go much higher than average. But you can see the majority, though, are still below average all the way to start of December, and that, again, plays into the fact of the potential for a colder than average start to winter. In the longer term, though, again, a lot of scatters, some going record strengths, some staying very, very weak as well. So it's just something we're really going to have to see what happens in the longer term. And it's, again, another major climate driver. In this stage, it is looking encouraging for the end of November, start of December. And to be honest, beyond that is probably too far ahead, really, to take it really with an exact forecast, because you can see the amount of divergence there is towards the end of the runs. So we do have a look at the shorter range forecast, or the zonal winds. This just gives us an idea of what we're seeing right now. You can see at the moment, right at the sort of the start on the left here, you can see generally the zonal winds are quite weak. You can see generally in the green, and right towards the top of the atmosphere, it's just getting into the yellow, so sort of 25 to 25 meters per second. You can see over the coming weeks, as we head towards the first week of November, see the zonal winds really do strengthen in this current GFS forecast towards the top of the stratosphere, getting up towards 55, 60 meters per second at the 10 HPA level, which we tend to look at as getting much stronger from around sort of 10, 12 meters per second, towards sort of 25, 30 meters per second. So much, much stronger, and even towards the surface level as well, getting much stronger as well. So the potential for seeing westerly winds, and that's what we've been seeing in the longer term, of seeing mainly westerly winds and strong low pressure signal. So it is looking like we could be going into quite a zonal phase for the start of November on this current forecast. You can also see on the right the anomaly charts. You can see blue is below average strength and red is above average strength. And you can see right now at the top of the stratosphere it's much, much below average, around 5, 10 or even 15 meters per second below average. Towards the surface it's a lot more varied. We have a bit of a weaker at the moment, and we've got that northerly wind, and then we get a bit of a stronger pattern with westerly winds once again. And then towards the longer term, you can see pretty much for the whole atmosphere, we're seeing stronger than average zonal winds. You can see, even though it's going quite strong in the longer term, it is still only around or just above what we'd expect for this time of year. So it's not massively increasing, but it is returning to sort of what we would see, or what we'd say is normal for this time of year. If we do now have a look at the AO and the NAO, you can see at the moment the AO is trending to a positive phase, so stronger than average low pressure towards Iceland and the Arctic. And you can see, though, in the longer term, it does trend negative once again towards the start of November. Now, I've said this in other videos before. Remember, the AO is over the Arctic, so it can be a negative AO, and we can still have a lot of low pressure around, because the blocking and the weaker than average Arctic oscillation is the other side of the pole, towards the Canadian side or the Siberian side. So it doesn't always mean definitely cold weather. But if we do see a negative AO, it has higher chance if we see more blocking. We also have a look at the NAO. You can see it's actually still weaker than average. It's negative. So it's showing weaker than average low pressure in the North Atlantic and generally higher pressure. And that is something we have been seeing with a lot of amplification in the jet stream. We're going to be seeing a lot of westerly winds over the next few weeks. But at times they're going to be northwesterly. Yes, some southwesterly winds coming at times, some warmer sectors. But I do definitely think we'll be seeing some colder sectors move through at times. And that is something that which could bring cooler than average conditions at times. So it's not guaranteed to be stormy as such, because remember, we still do have a negative NAO, so there will still be some amplification in the jet stream, and this is just something we really need to watch over the coming weeks and months, because if it remains in this sort of negative phase, it gives us an increased chance of seeing something a little bit colder. Once that air towards the Arctic to our north cools down, if we see another northerly shot like we've seen in the last few days, that's where we increase the chances of some proper cold weather. If we now have a look at the ECMWF, having a look at the seasonal forecast for the mean sea level pressure. Now, this is the forecast for November, and you can see the UK just here. We've got higher pressure towards the middle of the Atlantic, so that's that negative NAO. But towards the Arctic, we've got lower pressure, which is, to be honest, expected this time of year, so generally a west-northwesterly airflow. If we move to December, you can see higher than average pressure over towards the UK and to our west. So that's a bit of an interesting pattern there, shifting up towards Greenland as well. So that could be symbolic of, again, a northwesterly wind, but at times higher pressure trying to build up from Europe. So potentially sort of a month of two halves, December. Again, it is a long-term forecast, so things can change. But looking interesting with that, those orange and yellow and orange colours shifting up towards Greenland. That could be symbolic of big amplified jet stream and maybe northerly winds at times. If we have a look at January, again, high pressure out towards the North Atlantic. No massive low pressure at this stage, so it's not guaranteed, of course, to be westerly pattern, but does look generally west to northwesterly. If we have a look at February, you can see more low pressure towards Greenland, and that is very much a zonal pattern with westerly winds. And you can see that gap between these orange colours and the blue colours, that's where the jet stream is going to be coming straight out from North America, likely to be pretty mild and unsettled as well. So that's similar to what we saw at the start with the Met Office blog post, where they said towards the end of winter we could be going much more mild and unsettled. So that's just something we've got to keep an eye on. If we have a look at the GFS ensembles for the extended range, now I haven't looked at this a lot because it is experimental, of course, but it is basically the GFS ensembles run out to a month. We normally look at it at about 2 weeks, so it's an extra 2 weeks added on, and you can see it is not sort of that great to look at, because you can see in the longer term there is so much scatter. So you can see there is a lot going quite cold, a lot going quite mild, and generally it is around average. But it's just an interesting thing to have a look at, because if we did start to see something significant come out within the models, then we could potentially start to see a bit of a drop in these temperature charts, or a rise if we see warmer conditions, and it could just be this is useful to see the start of trends perhaps, but at this stage generally is around average. Still a lot of precipitation signal around, so it does look westerly and unsettled as well, but you can't rule out cooler than average conditions, because of course there are quite a few ensemble members going down to the -5 or even lower than that. If we now finish off having a look at the CFS, again, it is an experimental model. It is not meant to be a forecast. It's just a bit of fun to run out all the way to the end of winter. So if you do run through it, you can see generally westerly winds over the next few weeks. As we head through the start of November, we could be going quite warm, in fact, with high pressure coming up from the south. Couldn't really rule out an Indian summer type pattern there. However, as we head to the middle of November, Scandinavian high builds in, and we pull in an easterly wind. Now, it's not a bitterly cold easterly wind towards the middle of November, but it would be cold enough to bring snowfall to a few areas, and we generally stay with this high pressure in and around the UK for a good week or so. Eventually, the Atlantic does break through, and we go mild westerly again. Towards the end of November and the start of December, we again stay generally westerly. And you can see at times we do see sort of northerly shots towards the middle of December. We do start to try and get a Scandinavian high going, but nothing too great going on. Towards the end of December, we again start to see the potential for seeing some colder conditions. We always try and see ridges building, but they never really come off. Again, southerly winds potentially taking over as we head towards the end of January. See again another northerly shot, but really only lasting a short period of time. And then right towards sort of the early parts of February, we go really quite mild and unsettled in from the Atlantic. Colder sectors at times, of course, but they're not going to be massively snow-worthy at all. And right towards the end of February, again, a lot of milder weather, hinting and flirting with that colder conditions to our north, seeing big polar maritime air masses move through at times, but it doesn't look anything majorly cold at this stage. And beyond that, as we head through right to the start of April, you can see again a lot of cold air coming through the UK, but it's nothing too sustained. It's nothing too massively cold either. So at this stage, CFS, dissimilar to what we were seeing in the first update, not going for anything massively cold. A few colder shots within that, and maybe a colder middle November. But as I said, it is an experimental forecast. If we have a look at the 6Z run, or if you, after this video, have a look at the 6 or 12Z run this afternoon, evening, it will very likely show a very colder spell at times. So it is just really for a bit of fun, having a look at what we could potentially be seeing throughout winter, and generally have a look at themes as well. And it did sort of crop up the potential for more blocking and more high pressure towards the early part of winter, and towards the later part, a bit more unsettled conditions. So you could potentially sort of see something from that. But at this stage, it is still up in the air. We don't know exactly what's going to be happening. It's just at this stage, the highest chance, really, from the longer range climate drivers is a colder than average start to winter, so November, December, or even into January, and then potentially a mild end to winter. But it could all flip on its head. All we need is one stratospheric warming or a slight shift. And remember, the weather and the climate doesn't always follow these drivers. We can see things contradict themselves, and we can see very cold conditions, even late winter with an El Nino. So yeah, we'll have to keep an eye really what happens over the next few months. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you check out my short range forecast later, and I'll see you again for another video soon.